first thing we're going to look at with fractions is, what is a fraction? There's two ways that we can think of it. One way is part of a whole, and another one is part of a group. Let's have a look on the board. Here's a few examples. The first one is a chocolate bar. This chocolate bar is in 8 chunks. If we have one of these 8 chunks, that is 1/8. Or sometimes we say 1 out of 8. But 1/8 with the TH at the end. So it's part of a chocolate bar. Or you could have a pizza. And let's say we have one piece of pizza. There are 4 pieces altogether. So it's 1 out of 4, or 1/4. Or we can even say 1/4. It all means the same thing. A quarter, a fourth, or 1 out of 4. We could even think about time. You know, people will often say, I'll meet you in half an hour. That's using a fraction as well. So 1 whole hour, if you think of 1 whole hour, this would be half an hour. So it looks like that. So we've got 1/8, 1/4, or 1/2. So just think of it as part of a whole. The next way to think of fractions is part of a group. Let's look at these shapes here. If we look at the red shapes, we have 1, 2, 3. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 altogether. So 3/10 are red. 3 out of 10, or 3/10. Now let's look at the yellow hexagon. Obviously, 1 yellow hexagon, and there are 10 altogether. So 1/10 of these shapes are yellow hexagons. Now, a common mistake that people make is they say there's 1 yellow hexagon and 9 of everything else. So they say 1 out of 9. But you have to remember the bottom number. We want to put all of the shapes. So there's 10 altogether. Now let's go with the blue rhombuses or diamonds. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have 6/10. Now sometimes people will call this 6/10, but you have to remember it's 6/10. So it looks like this. With the TH. And that shows that it's part of, that shows that it's a fraction. Either part of a group or part of a whole. Our next question is, where do we use fractions in everyday life? So we're thinking outside of math class, where do we use fractions? Let's have a look. Here's one example when we're sharing food. Let's say you have a cookie. To share evenly, each person would get a half. Or let's say you're having some pepperoni pizza. This pizza is divided up into 4 sections. So each section is 1/4 or 1/4. Or you might say, can I please have just half a cup of water? Even when you're saying that, you're using fractions. Another place that we use fractions every time we go on a trip. We've got to pay attention to our gas in our vehicle, right? This person is at a 1/4 tank. So they better start thinking about filling up. So here's empty, or 0 amount of gas. Then we've got a 1/4 tank, a half tank, 3/4 of a tank, and then a full tank. So you might hear somebody talking about, hey, do we need gas? No, we're fine. We've got just over half a tank. We can make it to Regina, no problem. Or, yeah, we better get gas. We're below a quarter. And if you're very low, you'll probably notice that even there's a little light that comes on that shows you when you're almost empty. And then you better really start thinking about getting that filled up. Another place that we use fractions is if we're measuring. This kid, for example, is 42.5 inches tall. So that means 42 full inches plus another half an inch. So we say that 42.5. Or let's say we have a picture frame. Maybe you're making a picture frame, and you know that each side of the picture frame to fit the cat picture has to be 27.25 centimeters. So you could carefully measure that out, 27.25 centimeters, to make sure that you have the right size of picture frame. Our next question is the same fraction always the same amount? Let's look at a few examples. Let's say we have some Mountain Dew here. And your mom says, hey, how much Mountain Dew did you drink? And you say, only half a bottle. Well, that could mean two different things depending on the size of the bottle. Here's a size, like the small regular size. Half of that isn't that much. But if we're talking about one of the large family size 2 liters and you drink half of that, that's a lot more, and your mom might not be too impressed with you. Or let's look at pizza. You could have a small pizza and an extra large pizza. If you have 1/4 of the small pizza compared with 1/4 of the extra large pizza, this quarter is much bigger. So when you say you had 1/4, it's important to know what you're talking about. So 1/4 can be different depending on what you're talking about here. Or let's look at 2 vehicles. Okay, my first vehicle was a 1981 Volkswagen Rabbit, and that thing did not have a lot of power, but it was very good on gas. But it had a very small gas tank. So if I had half a tank of gas, it might only cost me $20 to fill it up for a half a tank of gas. Now let's look at this big truck over here, big monster truck. If you've got to fill up this monster truck and it's not half a tank of gas, it's probably going to be $100 or $200 just to fill up that half a tank. So as you can see, when we're talking about fractions, it depends on what the item is that you're talking about. So half of which size of bottle, 1/4 of which size of pizza, and a half a tank of which car or truck makes a really big difference. Thanks for joining me as we've been learning about fractions.